In the Blender Sensei format, the control of the views exists in the top 1 through 9 buttons, not in the numpad, although you can access them through the numpad, but majoritively we use the we're going to use the 1 through 9 at top. So if you hit 1, that puts you into front, and then 2 is back. So 1 front, 2 back. Then 3 is right, 4 is left, 5 is top, 6 is bottom, and that's pretty much all you need to know. It's important to note that the type of view we're in when we go into these different views, whether it's front or back or right or left, top, bottom, this is called an orthographic view. And in the orthographic view, it appears as though the cube is flat, because the orthographic views, as you can see here, it says ortho, removes the perspective, and this can become very helpful in layout and design and generally just modeling your objects in your scene. As soon as you hold down the middle mouse to rotate, you are back in perspective. So traditionally, the number 5 on the keyboard pops you back out into perspective in Blender. Typically, when you're jumping from the different views, front, back, right, left, and you can just experiment with the top numbers to see where these are going. Typically, you want to stay in orthographic view, and then if you want to pop back into perspective, it's much easier just to start rotating again. Okay, so to recap, you zoom in and out by scrolling your middle mouse back and scrolling it forward. You hold Shift and middle mouse button to pan around, and you just hold the middle mouse button alone to rotate. And if you select an object, you'll rotate around that object. Tab is a hotkey to get into edit mode, and down here where we control the selection type. And also in Blender Sensei format, one thing I actually picked this up in using the program Modo, which I'm not a super huge fan of Modo's modeling system. Modo has very good material library, but I'm not a huge fan of the modeling. But one thing I did like was the you control which editing type, whether it's vertices, edges, or planes, by hitting space. You can rotate them. So I basically set that up to do that. So say I have this vertex selected over here, and I hit G to grab that, and I'm moving it around. But then all of a sudden I decide I want to edit this whole face here. Instead of having to bring my mouse all the way down here and select the face, edge, or vertices, I just hit space and it pops up, the menu pops up wherever my mouse is, so I don't have to bother with going down all the way to the edge of the screen. And I'm going to select face, and I select that face, and I can hit G and I can move that around. So in Blender, S is to scale, so if we hit S, you'll see we can scale that face up and down. And to select multiple faces, you just hit Shift. So we'll click this face, and if we hit S, you see that scales both of those now. And if I just select this face, it's going to scale that one. And you can hit R to rotate the face. So if I hit A, that's going to select all. And if I scale it, you'll see that it's scaling the entire object. Pretty much the same as if we hit Tab to get out to back into object mode and hit S. I'm going to go ahead and hit delete and delete this cube, and I'm going to press Shift A, which if you press Shift A, this brings up your add menu. And you have the different meshes you can select: plane, cube, circle, monkey, all this kind of stuff. The monkey is typically, in 3D programs, there's usually, it's like a teapot. There's like this, it's kind of a generic object where you just real quickly need to see what a more complex shape than like a cube or a sphere would look like in a scene. And of course, one advantage of going into the different orthographic views in Blender is that if, say I hit 1 and I'm now in my front view, if I press R to rotate, it will automatically constrain the object, in this case this monkey head. It will automatically constrain it to the viewing angle. So if I hit Control Z to undo that, and then I hit 5 to go into top, and I hit R to rotate, you can see it's rotating constrained. You can also constrain your rotations and scales and movements by clicking the middle mouse once you've started it. And what I mean by that is, say I hit R to rotate, this monkey's just going to go in a random rotation direction, but if I hold down the middle mouse, you'll see the blue and green and red lines pop up. And if I gesture my mouse in the direction I want to rotate it towards, and then let go of the mouse button, but I'm still moving the mouse around, it will constrain the object to rotate in that direction. So this is a huge time saver, and especially for people like me who do not remember things well, and especially if I'm in a hurry, sometimes it takes me a minute to try to remember, well, am I wanting the Z-axis, the Y-axis, the X-axis? And I don't want to have to think about that. I just want it to rotate in the direction I want. So once we have it rotating in the direction we want, if we hold Control, that will constrain the rotation. And what that does is it constrains your movements to the grid. So likewise, if we hit S to scale, and then I hit the middle mouse button and pull it up on this Z-axis, it's going to only scale it up and down this angle. And if I hold Control, it will constrain it proportionally to the grid. It's much easier to see that something is constrained to the grids if we're looking in an orthographic view. So I'll go ahead and delete that monkey head. And I'm going to hit Shift A, and this brings up my add menu. We have curves, surface. We'll get into all this stuff: text, armatures, lamps, force fields. But mostly starting out, you're going to be using just the add, mesh, and these are all your different kind of primitives, like a sphere here. I'll hit S to scale this. If you see this little lifesaver looking buddy here, that's your 3D cursor. And your 3D cursor controls a number of things, but one of the main things it controls is where stuff in your 3D view is generated. And under Blender Sensei format, to move that, we hold Control, then right mouse click. And you can just put it wherever the mouse is. Or say I want to go into top view, and I'll press Control and put it here. But say I basically want that to be the 3D cursor to be on the grid. I've got it in the top view where I want it to be, but I want it to snap to the grid. So if I hold down Shift S, and this brings up your snap menu, which comes in handy for a lot of different purposes. But we'll go ahead and click cursor to grid, and it did not get it quite to the grid. Maybe I need to be a little closer. So I'll hold Control and right click it to get a little closer to the grid. Let's see, about right there, but I want to go here. So we'll hit Shift S, cursor to grid. There we go. It didn't snap right down to the bottom because it's also considering an invisible grid going up and down, which you can only see like in front view. Wherever we move the 3D cursor and then we hit Shift A, that's where it will send the thing that you just made. So I'll move it over here, and I'll hit Shift A and make a cone, and then I'll hold Control and hit right click to move the 3D cursor, and hit Shift A here and make a cylinder. These are just, different kind of basic shapes. But I'm going to press A, which selects everything in here, and then hit delete. And then I'm going to press 1 to go into front view. I'm going to hit Shift S, cursor to center, and that's an old reliable right there. You can also, if your cursor is somewhere else, if you hit Shift C, that will also immediately put the cursor back to the center. And that's a very common thing to do. So I'm going to hit 1 to go into front view, and then Shift A, mesh, add a cube. So you can see the kind of lightly this grid. If I zoom in on this cube, the grid subdivides itself, and the more you zoom in on the grid, the more you zoom in on the object, rather, the grid becomes more subdivided. And what's really cool about this is if I zoom out to where the grid is about 1/4 the each grid square is about 1/4 the size of this cube, as you can see. And if I hit G to grab this cube and then Control, it will snap this cube along this grid, which is great. So say I wanted to have it exactly aligned with the X, Y, and Z axis here, and I move it right there. But then say, well, let's duplicate this. I'll duplicate it, hold Control to constrain it, and then move it a half space over that way. Well, I'll just go ahead and grab this one too, hit G to grab it, hold Control to constrain it, and move it over here. So you can see there's about the space of 1 cube in between these two cubes. If I wanted to move the cube more precisely, all I do is zoom in, and then if I hit Control G to grab this cube and Control, it will now move it on the increments of the grid that have appeared once I zoomed in. But you can see how if you needed to hit G, Control, have a subdivided distances. I'll hit D to duplicate this, to duplicate that, and hit Control over. Then you can, get that more precise control.